Hey guys, it's Rose. This is my October wrap-up video. It is a little bit late. I had Martian death flu last week and I was in no shape to be filming. But I am here now and I hope that you will forgive me for being a little bit late with this one. So last month, obviously, I did what most people do and I read some spooky reads for October. I was a little bit afraid because I don't like scary things. They scare me, funnily enough. But I am proud to say that I did make it through the whole month. I managed not to have any nightmares. I'm very proud of myself for that, even though it's silly. And let's just dive right in. I started off my month reading these books, which is the majority of the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. So that was Interview with the Vampire the Stat, Queen of the Damned, The Tale of the Body Thief, Memnoch the Devil, and then I got about halfway through The Vampire Armand. I finally got around to reading Dean Koontz's Strange Highways, which is a short story collection of his. I also finally got around to reading Max Brooks' The Zombie Survival Guide, which is something of a companion to World War Z. For my Star Wars this month, I read Red Harvest by Joe Schreiber. This is kind of like a zombie Sith Lord mashup, and it was surprisingly good. I also read the first two books in the Blythewood series by Carol Goodman, which is a series of young adult novels. The first one is called Blythewood, the second one is called Ravencliff, and the third is called Hawthorne, and I haven't been able to get that yet because it is on order at the library right now. Finally, I only got around to starting one Stephen King book, which I feel a little bad about because I intended to read more of his, but Anne Rice kind of swallowed my October. And I did start The Gunslinger, which is the first of the Dark Tower books, but I didn't quite finish it. So that's my rundown. I'm going to talk about some of these books in a little more detail now, and some of the things that I picked up about writing horror, which is something that I don't do a lot of, but which is still a very interesting thing to discuss. So first off, Anne Rice. Really great author, obviously very well known, very gothic style, and she's a perfect example of using language to mimic the kind of characters and the style of your books as a whole. A lot of what she does is very flowery, it's very poetic, and it's got a very gothic romance word choice to it, as well as the characters, the settings, the plot lines. The words themselves have this great gothic romance feel, and I just think that's really awesome. So I was impressed with that. However, it became a little overwhelming after a while. So the reason that I did not finish The Vampire Armand is not actually that it's a bad book. I was quite enjoying it. The Vampire Chronicles is kind of split into two styles, I want to say. One is to have straight up sort of memoirs of the vampires, and the other is to have more supernatural stories spanning multiple different characters. And I prefer the straight up memoir one. That's just a personal choice of mine. And so I thought I was going to love this, but by the time I got to it, I read all of these in a row. So this was my sixth book in a row in the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, and by the time I got to it, I was just a little overwhelmed by all that flowery emo-ness, and I needed a bit of a break. Nothing wrong with the book itself, but I probably wouldn't recommend reading all of them in one fell swoop, because I started to get a little tired of it by the time we got to there. And there's still more to the series. I have some of them behind here. There's Merrick, which is one that starts to tie it in with the Witches series. Then there are 3 books in the Witches series. And then there are these 3, Blood Canticle, Blackwood Farm, and Blood and Gold. But I kind of wanted to finish the entirety of the first run of the Vampire Chronicles, but I just needed a break. But it is a really interesting book just for the language use, because it's a very, very different style. It's also a really interesting series for dealing with characters that aren't particularly likable, because it is vampires, they are quite romantic, they can be sympathetic at times, but they're murderous killers. There's no getting away from that. And every now and then, when you're starting to get a little too sympathetic toward the characters, she'll drop in quite a horrible, bloody scene to remind you that they're monsters. And it's a really interesting way to have all of your protagonists be horrible, monstrous creatures and balance out this sympathy and lack thereof. The first two especially are amazing for that, because the vampire Lestat, who is the main character throughout the entire Chronicles, is the villain of Interview with the Vampire, which you will know if you have seen the movie. And he's purely the villain in the first book, which is told from the vampire Luis's perspective, and the second book is told from his, and you see this completely different viewpoint, and suddenly he's not the villain anymore, and it's a really interesting move to suddenly make the villain of the first one, the most famous one, the protagonist of the rest of the series, and to make Louis, the one that you quite liked in the first one, kind of a whiny bugger in the rest of it. It was really interesting, and I think that that's one of the best things about the series. If characterization is the soul of the Anne Rice books, then a book that's quite opposite to that and much scarier is Dean Koontz' Strange Highways. And I was so excited about this one because I've wanted to read it forever. I adore Dean Koontz. This book has reminded me how much I adore him, and I'm really excited to read some more of his in the coming months. But I don't really remember any characters from it, because this is all about the evil things, the monsters, the creepy crawlies under the bed, and it's the concepts and the ideas of those scary things that stays with you more than the characters, which is the opposite of the Anne Rice books. And it was two really interesting sort of polar opposites on the horror spectrum. And some of these are truly horrifying. Some of these stories are still wedged in my brain because they're scary, and they're not about the people, they're actually about the scary thing, which can be a little bit rare for horror. So I loved it. I thought it was amazing. I was a little unimpressed with this one, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it is not the book's fault. This edition is the revised edition, and it does mention that this was a book that Stephen King wrote quite a while ago, and he doesn't love it too much, and he sees a lot of flaws in it. And he tried not to revise it too much, but a lot of people say that it's quite hard going. And then the other books from the Dark Tower series that are more recent get really, really good. So I'm willing to believe them on that, and say that at some point I will get through this one and try to read the rest of the series. But this is the last book I read this month. And I think that at that point I was just a little horrored out. I like to have a lot of variety in my reading, otherwise I do get bored, and that's when I feel like I can understand people who talk about reading slumps, because if I was only ever reading one genre, I would definitely get that. I don't, because I switch it around a lot. So I think that this was just, I was picking it up at the wrong time, and it's not the book's fault. So I can't say anything more about that book. There's not a lot to say either about the Zombie Survival Guide. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's kind of interesting in that it's set out as a non-fiction book. It's set out as a field guide, and a lot of it is actually sort of practical advice taken from other field guides. The thing that bothered me is that there were chunks of this that were solely addendums to World War Z, bits about the science behind this virus, bits about the history of previous zombie attacks that were kind of like, not sure how this fits. I mean, it does what it says on the tin. For me, I think I'm a big zombie fan, or I was a big zombie fan for a long time, so I thought a lot about all these survival things. And this is also, obviously, zombies became hugely popular in between when this was published and today, and I feel like a lot of these things are no longer novel or fascinating, but, you know, still a good book to flip through every now and then for amusement's sake. Now, the big surprises of this month were these three, because, first off, Star Wars Red Harvest. I actually had really, really no hope for this one. I thought that this was going to be kind of awful. I thought, you know, zombie Sith Lord, God, that sounds terrible. And I actually really liked it. Maybe it's because my bar was set so very low that I was bound to be pleasantly surprised. It's a very fast read. It is quite scary. It is definitely on the sillier end of things because it's zombies and Sith Lords. There are some very gruesome bits. There are some great new characters. All in all, this was a very pleasant light horror surprise for me. And I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, because it is straight up horror, and I did. I do also think that the fact that it was Star Wars had a lot to do with that, because a lot of zombie books, if they're set in our world and our time, need to rely on the characters and some kind of new human interaction happening to make it novel, to make it interesting and engaging. Because this was set within the world of Sith and Jedi and Force and all these almost magical elements, you didn't really need to do that so much. Just setting these two things, zombies and Sith Lords, together was kind of enough to make it interesting. Obviously not a book for you if you're not a fan of zombies or Star Wars. And finally, my last big surprise were these ones. I picked up Blythewood at a library sale, I believe, and mostly because of the cover. I mean, look at how pretty these are. They're stunning. They're so, so pretty. Obviously this one more than this one, because I borrowed this from the library after I read the first one. But they look so beautiful. They are very much in the supernatural young adult rather than the horror genre. They're that side of spooky reading, which really was quite a nice break after reading all the straight horror and thriller. It was a really, really nice change for me, and that may have had something to do with why I enjoyed them so much. But they're really nicely written. I don't read a lot of young adult because I simply don't relate to it anymore. A lot of them are set at school times and first romances, and I'm married and in my 30s, and I don't connect to it emotionally the way that maybe I used to. And that's not a value judgment on the genre or on anything. It's just that I don't relate to those things very much, so I don't often read them. These books, however, the supernatural element really, really helped because it gives it a little more to hang itself on. The other thing that really helped is that the romance isn't the central focus of these. The focus is her growing, the focus is the supernatural battles, the focus is her friendships as well, and also female-focused books, which obviously I really, really enjoy. Again, just because I relate to them a little better, me personally. I love the fact that the female friendships were a huge part of it, and they were more the focus than romance. I thought that was amazing. I thought that the mystery of her family and her past was also almost bigger than the romance, and that made me so happy. The romance is moving toward the center in this book, but I'm hoping that the last book doesn't make that overwhelming. And I really enjoyed the fact that these are kind of crossed into historical fiction because they're set at the turn of the century, and there's parts of it that are about the Triangle Shirt Factory fire. There are bits that mention the Titanic. There are bits that mention the Woolworths building. There are connections to the real world, and that makes it really interesting for someone who enjoys historical fiction. And I enjoy reading about it in the same way that I would enjoy reading about an actual finishing school at the turn of the century rather than a supernatural one. So I really, really would recommend these. I cannot wait to read the third one. I don't know when that's going to arrive in the library, but very, very excited for when it does. And that was it. I was super proud of myself for managing to read horror for a whole month. Yay! And I was really pleased that I liked everything that I read. Surprising, because usually there's one or two duds in there. Zombie Survival Guide was probably the closest we've got to a dud this month. And if meh, it's fine, is the worst thing that I can say, that means it's a pretty good month. So I hope you all had a lot of fun with your spooky reads as well, and I hope that you will forgive me for posting this a little bit late. Thanks. Bye.